what a real He-Man is? I just thought somebody would do this, kind of limber up and break their own fingers. And not let on. Do it and then go ahead and wait until they got in their car and pulled away and then go, ah! There's an older joke. Nah, a real He-Man is a guy that puts on a condom with a tire tube. Tonight's general subjects covered by the news items, which will be read first, include such topics as to give you something to do with your mind. And the dead spots, see, between reading these, when it gets so silent in here and out in people's homes, I can hear it, and it just goes. So at least you don't feel too spooked. You can then look and think about that and listen to the whirl, whirl. We'll begin with page 1. Upon discovering the talent to speak, man immediately made up the word, word, followed forthwith by euphemism. As he had stopped to pop into yet another convenience store, college, church, or other institution, one man always left his motor running. See, by doing so assures that you'll never pick up anything untoward during your sojourns therein. Before he'd leave the house each morning, one man would write out a list of things to do which he'd take with him. And every day the list would basically be the same. It'd say things like pick up laundry, bread, dog food, and coffee, and make funeral arrangements. In a closed system, everything can be used as a substitute for everything else. This is one of the perplexing enigmas of man bluntly. Thus is one of the perplexing enigmas of man bluntly solved. A certain man who continually looked up the definitions of words in the dictionary said that even though he did not limit his use of them thereto, he did want to see what everybody else thought they meant. Only those who still don't get the point of life try and make art with a message. Another difference between real mythical warriors and the routine variety is that the latter always have permanent targets and foes. One man used to change his socks, his hairstyle, the station select buttons on his car radio, and even move the furniture around in his apartment. All, whether it actually needed to be done or not. More about words. Men came up with the concept of the past so that they wouldn't have to so directly confront theirs. Man's institutions, indeed civilization itself, is to emphasize the importance of the collective over the individual. Only man can think and thus feel himself apart from the herd. But this ability profits none but the renegade. In the early days of mystical study, there were two distinct schools, one poetic, the other more technical and devoted to the physical mechanics involved in the attempt to extend consciousness. And in lieu of tonight's state lottery, we bring you this noodle inquiry. This one entitled, Is This Progress or Not? Those with many gods don't actually believe that they are them, while those who have only one do think that he's really it. Those of you with potentially winning numbers might care to note that this could well have to do less with theology than it pragmatically does with normally unrecognized aspects of men's mental operations. No land is stable with conflicting contenders to the throne, and no neural knight is on a useful course who follows but one sire. One man thought, words are like magnets, and my mind, the North Pole. A certain father told his son the following story. There was once a man who had a friend he greatly admired, and one day asked him if it was difficult to keep riding after you'd already been to the destination. And the boy was left for the moment to ponder for himself whether this actually had to do or not with matters of horsemanship. There was once a chap who, whenever he had heard tales of the trials and tragedies common to human existence, and hear marvel expressed regarding man's ability to survive them, would think to himself, what is the challenge to and triumph in being able to breathe? The keeper of the royal stables one day said to his son, as they went about their daily duties, only two kinds of men are ever satisfied, the ordinary and mystical warriors. Feeling it potentially profitable to be critical of others when deserved is the rudder proper to those content to sail the city seas. One day some words were talking, and one of them noted, you guys realize that next to sex, humans bad rap us worse than anything. And they all nodded their agreement to that, with one word even adding, and to top off the outrage, never even credit us for them being able to do so. The preceding scene was brought to you this evening courtesy of Dizziness and Confusion. Say, Eveline, didn't you used to have a CD by them? No, Josh, they're the ones your brother Frank used to work for. Really? Are you sure? One guy said, it's tiring to try and be more conscious. And his better part replied, that's because you're ordinary. From the Mystic's studio comes this creative tip to would-be artiste. There is no such thing as original noise. By its very definition, nothing mechanical and automatic is original. And nothing is more mechanical than the normal din of the mind. Further note, by its own operational definition, nothing original can be automatic and perfunctory. There was once a people with a mythology which told a strange story of how, after life had given birth to the universe and all the normal creatures in it, the creation machine continued to run on for a bit even after its work was done, and a few non-standard beings came out who were unexpectedly able to see the actual generative machinery still at work and realize its intended purpose. They also seemed to think it would be to everyone's benefit if they made this information publicly available. But when life discovered what they were attempting, it told them to shut up. And most of them did. One day, one guy thought, we're all kin to somebody. And the transcendental part of his mind said, include me out of this if possible. You can't see stars at noon, nor sense the cold when you're dead. So, watch who you're related to while you have the chance. Update. Life still has men's hormones doing things that it makes their neurons try to rationalize and explain away. such as coming up with the concept of patriotism to help camouflage man's continuing mammalian territorial aggression. Tonight's supplement to your rhetorical thesaurus, words, substances with such expansive ability as able to conceal a whale in a telephone booth. To his eldest son, a certain man so noted, in some ways things are exactly as they seem, while in others almost the opposite. And yet in all instances the two overlap and drive men to near distraction. Being a mystic is no job for part-timers, unless of course you're a part-time human. The normal, the sane, have as part of their responsibility the duty to fret over the unchangeable. One guy said, "It's tiring to try and be more conscious," and his mind added, "Yeah, and way too quiet." The neural explorer ultimately comes to see the relationship between speech and reality as similar to that of clouds to the heavens. That is, while they're necessary, they can also distract from the beauty of a clear blue sky and block out some of the warmth and light. Don't let the children get too close. It's another one of those descriptions. Just a living life. What a would-be warrior does until the doctor comes. That is, until he's able to administer to himself properly. A space update. The mind of a mystic is a UFO. A story from court. So noted the royal thinker to the young prince one day. The reason that the so-called enlightenment or awakening sounds so strange is that it is one answer to many questions. Or shall I say, the one answer to all questions. Part 2. One day the royal thinker said to the prince, "The reason that the so-called enlightenment or awakening sounds so strange is that it is one answer to many questions, or should I say, the one answer to all questions." And after several moments of reflection thereon, the regent asked, "And what comes after that?" "Silence," replied the wise one. "Silence." The numerous and diverse euphemisms with which life has so graciously graced man serve in large part to keep him from seeing that he is not, shall we say, quite as free as he likes to believe. As the arrow left his enemy's bow, coming deadly on course toward the king's head, his aide-de-camp said, "Sire, what have all a man's achievements accomplished, if by his own inattention he is ultimately slain?" And after a momentary pause, the ruler finally turned to the aide and said, would you repeat that?" "Never mind, Your Grace. Never mind." And a final definition to our explorer's lexicon. Originality. A neural warrior's stopgap for no comment. For those of you watching this on TV or your automatic transmission that you may have pulled out in the garage, now, even though the title of this is New Intelligence, it is not really about intelligence in the sense that people normally use the word intelligence. It's a fine name. I let some people involved here with this kind of activity that came up with the idea of taping these and having them broadcast. I told them to come up with any name they wanted to, and that was a fine one. It was, what are you going to call it? Could have either been New Intelligence or Fresh Produce or Yeah, okay. But it is certainly not about intelligence in the normal definition or even connotation of the word, implying something to do with that which can be increased, that which can be judged, that which can be tested, that which is ordinarily available. What it is, what we're doing, what I'm talking about is, for those of you out there who might feel you're behind or just tuned in, is, without beating around the bush, is simply about that which has always been called in the Western world the mystical. And you have had going on as long as man has been recording his life. You have had going on two parallel histories. You've had the history of what man's been doing, but you have had simultaneously, and they do overlap, they run parallel, you have had what amounts to a metaphysical history of man. That if from the Western view, or there's some in China, but in the Western view, like the cave paintings, if you want to look at that as being some of the first recorded history of man, in France, they find the paintings and they show the little stick figure. Anyway, they show what appears to be hunting parties, and they show animals, and they show the men attacking them, etc. But they're drawn in such a way, and the other motifs running through it, that they obviously intended something, even whenever they've decided it is. And I'm just taking their word for it. I'm not making any comment that I know differently, but whatever it was, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, it is obvious to ordinary eyes, the anthropologist or anybody that goes there and they look, that there is something else intended in the depiction of hunting parties. That was the main thing. There was something else intended other than some sort of recording of about how many deer that they killed someday. That there is something else going on that is of a absolute metaphysical nature, that seems to be showing spirits. It just shows perhaps even hard to decipher figures, symbols, going on in the midst of what appears to be at first glance an outright, simple depiction of physical activity, survival activity, which if you look at, again, just taking this literally, just taking this as it's normally accepted, that if we look at that as being one of the earliest recordings of man's history, and you put yourself back there, and you would think, well, what would they put? If the intellect was getting to the point, we'll assume that they were already talking by then, but it's at least to the point that they're beginning to make symbolic gestures, which is what talk is, and so they begin to draw. And you would think, well, what would be the first thing you draw? It would be survival. It would be something about survival. What were they going to do? I could certainly throw in a quick, silly joke of some kind. What are they going to do, write a review of a movie? Just think about it. It would, and it's true all over the world, that the earliest recordings, the earliest writings, the earliest paintings, the earliest artifacts they find, other than the utilitarian aspect of perhaps a bowl or a pot, if they began to put decoration on it, the decoration always has to do perhaps with what they were drinking, or where a river was, or an animal that may have been slain and put in this bowl. But immediately with it, as I assume you know, I'm not going to try to describe, but in all the pictures there you have hunters, these little stick figures, and you have them out killing. And always floating around it are these apparently unrelated, or they're not specific, they're not literal representations of something. That sometimes they may appear to be the sun, and then it gets a little too strange, and you think, wait a minute, that was either supposed to be the sun or something else, or else. You know, Picasso, Van Gogh lived a lot earlier. It's just obvious that they are not literal representations of man's life. My point being, it is, I went ahead and said at the opening that this is not about intelligence in the normal sense, it is actually about the mystical. I just was saying that with no apology in the full sense of the word. That is, no additional explanation. But we do know, any of you who are just of routine intelligence, sophistication, know that the mystical has all kinds of strange connotations now, which is one reason I went ahead and did it. You know, I can off and on refer to it as all sorts of other things, neural exploration, internal space travel, you can call it all kinds of stuff. Mystical annoys enough people nowadays. Well, in various forms, it always annoys people. It always annoys the middle-class intelligentsia in the full sense of the word, the electrochemical sense, not the socio-economic sense. But it annoys them because it annoys humanity at the survival level to talk about things that are not related to survival. Then once the hormones are, for whatever reason, fired up in an individual or in some collection of people under the guise, the name of a civilization, they normally denounce in some way, or they dismiss, at the very least, the mystical. Because the institutional form, the closest form, becomes religion. And religion is something that collectively the people accept, and it becomes, again, an offshoot of behavior, ritual. And the mystical is always seen by those people, by the bourgeoisie of the nervous system at any particular time. The mystical is seen as being too ephemeral, as being too vague, as being too otherworldly. But you can't think about that much if you're ordinary, because you think, well, what's more otherworldly than the idea of a God somewhere? Or the idea that there are forces out in the universe that either send us buffaloes to kill or they don't. Or that we kill the buffalo and it goes back to God and God says, good going, and he sends down another one. Or he comes back that's actually God in the buffalo. Now remember, this is ordinary people. And they're the ones that then turn on the would-be mystics and go, what strange people they are. Because that level of humanity has never been able to, as they're not supposed to, come to any specific grips with what is mysticism. But in the Western world, you've also had running the history of not just, in a negative sense, collective man's attack and dismissal of the mystical. You have, especially after the fact, for instance, in the Western world, now referring to the Judaic-Christian, which is as much an institution, the mainstream of Western society as democracy, free market economy. But you also have now that keeps popping up, and it's accepted as being of some historical, of having some pertinence, having some validity. For instance, the Gnostics, that there were people involved, that there are now debates going on amongst the ordinary intelligentsia and theologians and historians, that much of, or some of, the Judaic tradition and much of the Christian tradition was lifted from this group of sort of vague people that didn't leave a lot of records, which always also annoys the ordinary of life. That the closer it gets to people actually involved with what they call the mysticism, the less the records are available, or else the shakier they seem, or either that or they're just too strange that they can't make anything, that they're at any rate. So you have the Gnostics, and you have, I'm just bringing you up to date with an example, it's nothing new. You had the Egyptians, if you want to consider them in the Western world. You had the Greeks, with the ideas, the recorded ideas of the time, that behind the temples, behind the ordinary, crude, ritualistic behavior of slaughtering animals, of slaughtering people, of observing all kinds of things and leaving food and praying to gods and having to pray, go through all sorts of things of turning 12 times and pray to one God, then walk across the temple and pray to 20 more and then go back to this one. That beyond that was the idea that somewhere hidden in the schools, and sometimes they even tried to report that they were actual physical locations in these public temples where they were teaching something else. That there were excavations, there were secret vaults and chambers below the temples wherein it was taught the mysteries. That is, the reality behind the rest of this. It is nothing new. But notice, it is nothing new to condemn it. And it is part of the job of ordinary humanity. And by condemn it, I don't mean they have to go out and engage in witch burning. All they got to do is treat it like, well, a bunch of crackpots. Just dismiss it is actually the better operative word than assail it, although they will intellectually. But it's a dismissal. Mysticism is UFOs. It's belief in Atlantis, which, in case you don't know, if nobody had come up, should we really deal with history, ordinary history? Those of you who like torts, either from the bakery or the judicial system, they're from the same Franco word. If there had been no idea of Atlantis and UFOs, man would have had to invent it. Perhaps you like crullers better. But that's simply a euphemism for a tort. It's a donut with lugs on it. It's a tire. Donut tire with lugs. The idea, now back to what I wanted you to see, there's a parallel always been going on that believes no matter where you are, that at the heart of every civilization, and civilizations are the only thing that counts, that is, groups of people, civilization is by and large, or I was pointing out to you tonight, is for the purpose of supporting, of magnifying, of glorifying. It is for the benefit of man the collective, not man the individual. And man the individual would never amount to anything. It's a simple fact. At the survival, physical, literal level, or at the metaphysical level. A Buddha, if there was such a person, a Confucius, would have done nothing, could do nothing. One man never does anything. Or Romulus and Remus, if you want to look at another level. Even two guys would have never managed anything unless it attracted some other people. You've got to have a civilization. There's got to be something going on inside the life of man which is allegorically comparable to the organs in the human body, if you want to try that, or solar systems. It is simply that men have to come together, life sees to it, and they produce what's normally referred to as some civilization. And in every one of these civilizations, there could be a civilization that historically now is looked upon as being, compared to whoever's looking at it contemporaneously, could be considered to be just minimally religious. But it's not so. They were always religious in some sense, because that is a part of the institution. That is a part of the sinews that hold together any collective group of people. Because men will not just operate on the basis of we're going to pass laws, no matter how secular the society seems to be, such as Greece, or whoever you want to pick out. Men will not just operate on the basis of do not steal or we will kill you. Now, I'll stop most people, but I'll make them more careful. Any good bricklayer, anybody from Mississippi or southern Mesopotamia, but that is not actually what will hold civilization together. Also has to be running through that a feeling that it is not just illegal, not because we passed a law, that in some way it is transcendentally forbidden, commonly known as immoral, that we shouldn't do it. So no matter how non-religious, in retrospect, some civilization appeared to be, if it was a civilization if it was big enough to be remembered in any way, then it had running right through it a spirituality. But it was a ritualistic spirituality, and it was not much more than any common ritualistic behavior you see now, of lighting candles or doing rosaries, or the things on the wall 7,000 years ago of people praying to the gods for to send back the deer. If we killed all the deer this winter, all we could find, that in some way the gods will be pleased with us because we kill the deers in a certain way. Some guy came up with the idea that we put them out and slit their throats after we draw the picture of the sun or whatever. And if we do it there, then the universe, the gods, will send us back some more deer next year, and that kind of thing. That is religion. But it is always tied to the most simplistic form, is all that's seen, is all that's recorded, but it is there. There is also, at the time, now we're into an area that the history is even more suspect, even harder to find, much less interpret from an ordinary view than the kinds of history, as unreliable as it is, I'm pointing out now, of the ritualistic aspect of humanity, behavioral, the actual history of the men, of some group of people that lived at such and such time, and the civilization seemed to have survived more or less such and such number of decades or centuries, and then they seem to have gone away, or they seem to have been overtaken by such and such. And there's all sorts of records of what they ate, what kind of temples they had, how they looked, how often you were supposed to go there and worship, what you were supposed to give to the temple. But when it gets to some history of, well, there are people involved with trying to actually figure out what was going on rather than going through some ritual. What history there is qualifies as being extremely suspect. I'm talking about from ordinary views. I'm not getting to my explanation yet, or trying to turn you to look a certain way. It is that the normal history, as unreliable as even academics will say that history in general, or history in very specific instances, is very problematic what little traces we have of some group here or there, that even though it tells of warfares, or the continuing debate that they can't even make sense, did Troy actually exist? Was there such a, was it just mythology, or did Homer, there's all these stories, does it get so specific that it's actually there, and there are people still out trying to make their academic reputation to find the place? And yet it's sort of, it's iffy now, is there actually such a place, or was there ever such a place? As elusive as that sort of history can seem to be, the history of what was actually going on, if anything, in the minds of men, in a spiritual sense, as they would call it, is even less likely, less subject to being grasped. That there is even less of a history recorded about it. Almost none. It is additional ammunition for those of the middle of life to condemn and dismiss any history or alleged history or suspicion that there was some sort of metaphysical, mystical activity going on in that group. Because then they say, well, if it is that great, if the stories that people now hold dear, that there's some sort of mystical activity, there's always been some sort of secret work on this planet, some group of people that are in some way in touch with something, where is the reliable history? Which, if that doesn't sound familiar, how about this? You can see people right now, 1994, intelligent men, doctors of space science and cosmology, will look right in the camera and interview and go, well, now I'm not saying that every person who says that they've seen a UFO, much less been one, I'm not dismissing them all as crackpots. But may I ask you this, as a scientist, as a reasonable person, where is any physical proof? Where is just something that they stole, that they took, that they flinched from a flying saucer when they were there? Where is a piece that fell off? Where is something? There is none. Does that sound familiar? The history of the non-physical evolution of man, the metaphysical, the ordinary will say, where is something tangible? Which is part of the ammunition. Again, it's part of to keep life properly balanced, because in any other aspect of human existence, there is always something. There's a piece of pottery. Or here's a book that says, it's a sign of all the names of people who on such and such goddess's day showed up in 15724 BC. There is no such reliable record having to do with what we're normally call the mystical history of man. That's just further reason to absolutely dismiss it. Please note that no one ever asks, no one even inquires on the basis of just strict intellectual curiosity, such questions. I know I continue to bring them up, but notice nobody continues to ever notice them. Why in life, throughout all this history we have in the Western world here, 5,000 or 6,000 years of fairly well accepted history, that no one has noticed what I'm talking about there being no reliable history of the so-called metaphysical or the mystical? And no one asks, well, why is it so widely believed? And there is none. Does that say something? Which is a little, I almost hesitate to do that, because people have in the past, and I know are today, they will still turn around and use that like, well, the reason is, it's like, you know, why we can't find any reliable history or any reliable proof, any physical proof, just reasonable physical proof of flying saucers. I mean, everybody talks about them, or thousands, millions of people do, and you ask me why there's not? Because there is none. See, they got you. There is no history of man without a metaphysical history of man. Part of, again, the ammunition, part of the method whereby life is kept a certain balance is, no matter what it's called, metaphysical, mystical, at one time it's called philosophical even, had a bad name. What it meant was, think about it, jump back to the caveman days, jump back to where you were struggling each day for survival. And I say, as always, it's a gradual process. And it's getting to the point that instead of you having to spend 20 hours a day out hunting for food, at least you and your family die, it gets to the point that sometimes, once a month, you get a little ahead in food, and you have some spare time. And you know some of the other guys do. Some of the other caves there on the same side of the mountain. And some of them start sitting around, especially on days when you are not ahead in the food, and you're going out early in the morning to go out again. That may be the last time, your last day on earth, due to starvation. And you go out, and there's some of the other guys that, through whatever means, are a little food ahead. And they're sitting around a campfire. They're sitting around there just kind of spitting, and you know what men do, spitting and a jawing. What are they doing? Well, they're talking. They're sort of just passing the time, yeah. We could be magnanimous and say, well, they're probably reflecting on the nature of life. Well, what else you're going to reflect on? But you can say, well, they might even be, that could have been the nascent time of philosophy itself. And you go, well, yeah, I could go for that. I put it to you better. It would have to be they were engaged in the birth of metaphysics, because that's what all reflection on life. You only got two choices for me to make the point. You're either going to talk about, they're sitting there and they got a little spare time. Now you are fixing to go out again, do or die for the day. And you look over there and there's 2 or 3 of your neighbors sitting there just talking. And it's obvious they're not going out, that you've already been through enough that you know that some days people get ahead in their food and they don't have to go out. So you know that today's one of their days, and there they sit. Put yourself back there again. And those of you, you're supposed to be good, you know you don't have to do this laterally down a timeline to go back historically. All you got to do is go down in your own nervous system, and the history is still right there. That you would ask yourself, or if I ask you, what do you think they're talking about? You know that they're reflecting. You know that they're philosophizing. You know that they're engaged in metaphysics. It's either that. There's only 2 choices. To put it down crudely, what I started to point out the obvious, it's either them sitting there when I'm saying, where is that last herd that you found where you had such a big kill? That it's either literally about survival, or when I'm saying, by the way, you said you found a new water hole or a new creek that we'd never found. Where is it? But now remember, if they're sitting there and they're already fed and they got a little food and water ahead, that's the last thing they want to talk about. It's like going out to a bar now in the afternoon, you and your buddies, what are you going to talk about? I mean, you could say, well, we talk about the job. Yeah, how much? You go, God damn, I hate that job. And everybody else goes, here, yeah, I'll drink to that. And then you start talking about something else. You do not talk about survival once you got survival whipped. It would just be in passing. It's like, hey, how are you? God, boy, don't you hate the work? Shh, boy, I hate that thing. And then you start talking about something else. Sports, women, sex recreationally. You do not talk about survival once you are not struggling for survival. So you looked around, back to where you were, and you look around and you saw your neighbors sitting there. They don't have to work today. And you know what they're talking about. I've just done it for you. You know what they're talking about. And if we jumped into this, back thousands of years into this fictional caveman of mine, into his head, the guy going out to have to hunt today, to go out and actually hump it, and he looks around and there's a bunch of his buddies and neighbors not having to, and he knows why. And I said, what do you think they're talking about? With a little urging, he'd know. If he said, well, I don't know, and if I said, well, do you think they're talking about going out and hunting? And in other words, are they talking about work now that they got the day off? And all he'd do is think for a second and go, no. And you go, what are they doing? And even if he didn't have a word for it, even if he did not have a word for philosophizing, he would know, well, they're not talking about survival. They're not talking about what I've got to go do today. If I put it to him that way, he'd go, yeah, I know that. They're not talking about right now that they're going out and they could be out for another 20 hours, all beat up with brambles and bushes and scratch and getting wet on, and you could get killed. They're not talking about that, are they? Well, when they see you leave, they might, again, for 1 second, kind of laugh like, ha, there he goes again, boy, glad we don't have to. This job sucks, that kind of thing, then it's over. And if I said, are they talking about what you've got to do, survival? He would go, no. And with a little more urging, this never happens in history, but now listen to me. The dynamics of electrophysics, chemical physics, supports this. And if it doesn't, I'll make it support. If I said, I might have to ask 1 or 2 questions, but you can follow this. If I said, well, we're not sure what they're talking about. No, I don't know, but you're positive they're not talking about going out and doing what you got to do today. Well, hell no, because he knows. I said, well, you think about it for a second. If you were sitting over there, would you be talking about the very thing that you have finally reached the point, at least today, that you don't have to go do? Would you be sitting around talking about it? And so if I say, well, he's obviously not, they're not talking about that kind of thing. And you go, yeah, or my man would go, yeah. And if in some way I could put it to him, I can put it in words right now, but it almost makes no sense, even though the sense will, because you think, well, nobody ever do that. I know it. What the hell are you listening to me for? I'm telling you things nobody ever does that they're aware of. If and somebody could put it to him, and I said, well, so they're definitely not talking about survival, of getting out today and doing what you are faced with. And he'd go, yeah, that's for sure, because I wouldn't be. And if I said, well, do you like what they're talking about, even though we don't know what it is? Do you approve of it? And the answer would be, which you would never ask, because the sentence, I know, rhetorically makes sense, but you would think, you don't ask somebody, do you like what other people's talking about if you don't know what it is, right? Because the sentence is silly. You think, well, I don't know. But if I said, well, you know they're not talking about survival. They're not talking about man. They're not talking about the history of man, the physical survival thereof. And you'd go, no, he's not. So they're talking about something else. Yeah, without a doubt, I would be. All right, just answer me this right quick. We don't even know, but we know what it's not. Yeah. Do you like it? Do you like what they're doing? He would not. Physical man does not like the history of metaphysics. And he does not know why. You can't even ask the question. I don't want to beat it to death, but did you get it? There is something of some usefulness in your own brain that the sentence, the question that I said I would propose to this imaginary figure, that once we establish, well, you know they're not thinking about, you agree, they're not talking about survival. They're not talking about that kind of, that level of existence. He'd go, no, because he wouldn't be. If I had the day off, that's the last thing I'm going to do is talk about, other than you might say, where is the water hole, and et cetera. You understand that? You'd do that, but you're going to sit there, you got the day off. For the first time in 5,000 years, you got the day off, and you're going to sit around after you say something like, well, where's that new creek? And they say, we'll go over there 2 miles, and you're going to take a right. And you go, okay. After that, what are you going to talk about? You're not going to talk about that. You're not going to take work home with you. So, you know what you wouldn't do, and you know what they're not doing. And now I say, well, even though we don't know specifically what they are talking about, we have established what they're not. And the guy goes, yeah, because I know I wouldn't be. Now see here, the sentence makes sense when I say, well, do you like what they're talking about? Now see, the sentence makes sense, do you like what they're talking about? But now think about the scenario itself that I have set up. You don't know. He doesn't know what they're talking about. We've eliminated one thing. They're not talking about survival. Okay. So, but we know that, yes. Do you like what they're talking about? And here's where it doesn't make sense, but it's a fact. He'd go, no. All right, if you're missing a simple person, the more simple-minded, I'd say, okay. I could ask him, do you like the fact that they can sit there and just jaw the day away while you got to go work? Then even simple people would go, well, yeah, I see what you mean, because the guy would say, no, I don't. Well, that's just human nature, right? Yeah, right. Real enlightening too, right? Well, yeah, I got that. Yeah. So what's the point? And see, and they missed it. That's why I gave you the real dirty version. They do not like, without even knowing it, they do not like men talking about, other men talking about non-survival matters. The history of simple man, the history of physical man, does not care for the metaphysical history of man. It's not a plot, but you might see, once you begin to see that it has to do with an electrochemical balance and the progress of humanity collectively walking left foot, right foot, up, down, this way, the binary run of energy in this three-dimensional system, then that gives immediate rise to the ideas of good and evil and gods and anti-gods and etc. But on a level that it's never specified and never seen, is what I'm telling you now, that there is a built-in, if you were simple-minded again, if you were the more simple of intelligence, I'd say there is a built-in hostility. There is a built-in hostility toward the idea of metaphysics. But again, this almost, life is arranged to where it almost fits, because if you talk to ordinary people, civilized people, be they particularly religious or not, and you start talking about the metaphysical, the mystical, and nowadays in the Western world and growing areas of the whole planet, it connotes cults. And we all know what that leads to. I mean, you get a cult going, and, well, first thing you look down, and later you realize it was a charismatic leader. Guy took them for everything that was worth. Then the jig was about up, or they went broke, or he got caught with too many of the members' wives, And so he shot them all, made them drink. Remember, as opposed to South America, in the cult in Anchorage we were discussing, they made them drink hot chocolate laced with arsenic. Mysticism is, and it's nothing new, but I'm just pointing out now, it can be absolutely dismissed by the religious and the secular alike. It doesn't have to be, which historically it has been, and by and large, as mysticism was seen as an affront, as a danger, as a potential form, if not active form, of blasphemy to the organized religion, such as Christianity, as a rule. Now, I know things gradually change, you could find exceptions, but surely you people are wide enough in your perception now sometime to follow it. In general, the establishment of Christianity, for instance, does not approve of mysticism, which is one reason you have a few exceptions here and there, that they will go, well, perhaps Thomas Aquinas, perhaps St. Augustine sometimes got a little dizzy, or maybe, who knows, and maybe Meister Elkhart, maybe John Milton, maybe these guys, I don't know. Even the Pope or somebody would say, well, it's hard to just dismiss them out of hand. But if you went to see the Pope, or Billy Graham, or if there was a head rabbi, and you went to them and you got them to even theoretically agree that there have been some people in our past, in the past of our religion, our civilization's religion, who have, by all appearances, I don't know, they had some sort of spark, they had some sort of connection, they were in some way more religious or understood something that we didn't, or that we don't. You might get the guy to go, well, all right, I can't deny that. I cannot say that that's not true. But then the Pope or the minister or the rabbi would turn to you and say, but if what you're getting at is that you're trying to do that, no, young fella, straighten up. Now, you just got to, you understand, life always does that. It always has exceptions that somebody can point to and say, yeah, but couldn't we do that? Isn't that possible? Isn't that the exception? Doesn't that prove what I'm interested in? Then life, the major part of life, the institutional, the Fat Tuesday, the fat part, the flank, the shank of life can then go, well, now wait a minute. The very person you point out, Thomas Aquinas, for instance, you say, well, now the thing you point out, just notice, they only show up like once every 500 years. And we'll again assume that this, whoever it is, a rabbi or priest, is a fair, faithful employee to life itself, to his particular institution, and he'll look at you immediately. And he'll understand, he'll go, what are you up to? Because he'll know if you were there asking that kind of question, which is reflected again, if you want to go back to some stories of Jesus in the temple, Buddha talking to the head teacher that was instructing him in the Vedic traditions, that the day finally comes that he start asking questions that do not have to do, or they now transcend the history of their culture, the history of their religion, the physical representation and belief in gods, and he starts asking about actually getting in touch. And immediately the priest, won't call Jesus' mother and father and say, somebody do something with this kid, he's getting out of hand, or they won't tell him, no, we know what you're up to. And he tries to make some reference to Moses. And how about these stories about him going up and talking to God? And they go, yeah, but wait, you ain't no Moses. I served in the Senate with Moses. I knew Moses. And you ain't, that's a different story. He said, you ain't no Moses. I couldn't resist. There are always, in every field, by the way, exceptions outside the physical level of survival economics in reality. It's always exceptions because they can say, well, wait a minute, you are no Moses, you are no Jesus. And again, if you had gone that far and you were still trying to get out of the rabbi or priest's office without him having you arrested or tying you up, and you realize then you'd have to go, well, yeah, you're right. You'd have to go, no, I feel the spirit of Moses. And, you're not going to do that. Not if you were potentially a real mystic. But you learn that the world, even those apparently in the same race with you, or by race I mean like course of religion, that those on the same course, those in the same area, that you go to a priest, which is what those stories of Jesus and Buddha and Confucius, there's variations of it, that in some way that you have gone through it, whether you did it lit or not, that you went to what appeared to be or should be the source of metaphysical information. The history, the repository of the history of man metaphysically, and you go to a priest or a rabbi, And you go, what I want, no offense to religion, but I started reading, say, Thomas Aquinas. And I started reading some of this, or The Imitation of God, The City of God. I read some of these books, and oh yeah, I've read that in college. And you go, do you ever think that they're not just speaking allegorically, that these guys actually did something weird? They're going to say, no, you can't do it. No, don't even fool with that. Don't do that. And so it's like the priest in the story of throwing Jesus out or saying, come off that stuff. You know, now, come on. No. The history, the metaphysical of history of man is not only quite elusive, almost non-writ, but when it even pops up, when it's suspected, it is not treated in a very delicate, it is not treated in a very useful manner. One more time, though I accused or pointed out, not accused, I pointed out that ordinary humanity, the intelligence of man, never involves itself in this. Now turn it on yourself. Do you not find it interesting that we'll assume everyone seriously, sincerely still following this, that there's no doubt in you anymore, your nervous system feels it, since I am not charismatic enough to talk you into it. Or conversely, if it has been my charisma that talked you into it, as us mystics say, boy, you be in bad trouble. In deep metaphysical doo-doo. So the point is, your own nervous system, which is never outside the closed system of life, it is simply part of the web itself. I did write you a little story tonight that said that there was a group of people that had this strange creation story that said that life after life created the universe and all the normal creatures, that it was like this creation machine. That after, he kind of cut it down, or life cut it down, that was over. But you know how machinery does. It kind of kept running, and it like put out a few, like when life turned its head, a few creatures that the machine was supposed to have been over. Creation was finished, and here come, I didn't say it, but I assumed you called on. It was supposed to have been the mystically inclined. But the point being, see, they got there at the tail end when the machine was running down, and they were able to see the damn thing in operation. And that they also, later, seemed to have decided that would be to people's benefit. They didn't say their own, that would be to everyone's benefit to maybe tell other people. And as soon as life realized what they were doing, it said, shut up. Didn't kill them, didn't have to, it just said, shut up. The balance is such that the history of physical man does not treat kindly, does not interpret in any useful way, which is why you cannot find specific pragmatic help of what to do. All you can be told is rituals, or told about are rituals. And it is so easy. It is such a useful, as always, life. I know always appreciates my compliments to it. Such a coup de maître for it to have this one little part going on that would almost upset the balance, that almost, let's go back to my tale of mythology, my little made-up story, that almost implies that there are people around that have a closer connection to the original creation, which is normally called the mystical, and that life then has arranged it in such a way that it is dismissed, if not decried, but it is at least dismissed as being crackpotism, because you can't prove it, and there is no large following for it. And again, one of the beautiful strokes is when it does apparently show up, and I say apparently, I'm talking about from the collective view of man. That is, the public says, well, that's obviously a mystical group. If it gets that public, they're correct. It always is, by everybody's definition, a bunch of crackpots. There you are. Is there nowhere to turn to? Sweet Brutus. Well, yes. And then Caesar always wants to stand on the steps, hoping it's just still April. And they want to look out and ask, where? Where? Think how easy it is to overlook the fact that only by ordinary views, by ordinary middle class, middle of the road, collective view of intelligent men today, the idea of flying saucers Anyone who believes that they're literally here and talking to people are crackpots. Let's just take it. They're just crackpots. There's something wrong with them. Crackpot, by the ordinary definition, literally, well, not literally, but you know what it connotes. It means something that is so anomalous to reality is to be totally invalid. Inside of a closed system, there is no outside. That's why people never, the ordinary mind never questions, well, why is it we have so many people who believe such a thing, and then every time they seem to show up, they always try to be idiots, crackpots, self-destructive, and yet it keeps going on. But every time it seems to show up, every history I find of it, and especially if I found any, I'm speaking as an ordinary theoretical person, any apparent operation contemporaneously that'll show up is by its own definition, by all the news reports, by everyone's concerned opinion, truly crackpotish, dangerous, self-destructive, totally lacking in any merit. And yet no one says, well, wait a minute. Even if there are no such things as everybody else calls flying saucers, UFOs, where did their idea of it come from? And then the obvious answer from everybody else is, well, they're crazy. Well, how do you become crazy? I mean, do you get outside the system and you go out and you get a virus, which those of you that seem to like some of the science fiction stories I get little pieces of and heard throughout the history of man, it's like these viruses, always something alien gets to man and drives him crazy, turns him into something less than he is, turns him into an anomalous beast. But it's always the idea, science fiction could have seemed to be far removed from religion. Anytime you're thinking, well, it's something far away, then welcome to the middle class club. You don't even have to sign a card. You don't have to worry about whether they're going to send you one sooner than every 6 weeks and you have to return it at your expense or even theirs. There's nowhere to send it to. They're not shipping it to you from not only out of state, they're not shipping it to you from out of reality. It's reality of the month club, or in your case, with ordinary mind, it's reality of the second club. Or to be technical, it's ad hoc reality of the second club. But see, they can't get all that on the return address of the envelope. The key is originality. I was getting around to that, but time ran out. It's the stopgap answer. So until next time, be original. And do not ask anyone how. Just try and hold off until next time. You don't remember the boy and father that were out walking the midway and they stopped finally at one place? It was the booth that had the game. The guy would guess how long you could hold your breath.